Welcome to podcast number 73 for Thanks for Your Service. Our focus is on historical topics relating to the Australian military, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Just search for Thanks for Your Service. Our website is www.thanksforyourservice.net, and you can email us at info@thanksforyourservice.net. On the 5th of August 1944, there was a mass prisoner of war escape from a POW camp in Cowra in New South Wales. Cowra is preparing to commemorate the 80th anniversary of what is called the Cowra Breakout. Let's find out more. Joining us on the line from Cowra in New South Wales is Graham Apthorpe, the chair of the Cowra Breakout 80th Anniversary Committee. Graham, many thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure, David.
Now, you have a very special event happening in the first week of August. What is the event?
So this is the 80th anniversary of the Cowra Breakout, which occurred back in 1944, in August 1944. And we've got probably about 2 or 3 days of fairly intense commemorations. And we also have some lead-up events.
Can you take us through what actually happened in the breakout?
Well, if we go back to the beginning, when Australia came into the war in 1939, we followed Great Britain very quickly after their declaration on the 3rd of September 1939. The Australians sort of headed off to basically the Middle East, and also Navy went off to the Mediterranean, and we had some Royal Australian Air Force people went over to Great Britain. And we were fighting essentially Germany's Axis and allies, the Italians, and we were asked after some of those reverses in North Africa started to occur. We started to pick up quite a few prisoners, numbers of German prisoners, but large numbers of Italian prisoners. Great Britain asked Australia to build a number of POW camps. The numbers were quite large. They had taken them off. A lot of the Italians had been taken to India. It wasn't working out so well over there. There were disease problems. There were logistics and food problems over there. So they asked Australia might take, it was like probably up to around 20 to 30,000 Italian POWs. In the end, we only took around 15,000, but they started to come out here in the early 1941. And we had to build a camp here. And the reason they chose Cowra was because we had an existing military training camp here, which had been built in 1940. Things moved pretty quickly out here because this camp had to be up and running, and they had a number of meetings with contractors, with the Army surveyors. They selected a site, one of 4 sites. And I think they had a meeting up here in early April 1941. And believe it or not, that camp was actually running as a camp in June that same year, 1941. And I often tell the story, I worked in local government for 48 years, and if you could get a development application through for a garage in that time, you'd be going pretty well. So things can happen very quickly during World War II.
Italians were the first internee, well, not internees, but the POWs. Let's move to the entry of Japan in Australia into the war. So what happened after that?
Well, the Italians were there for a little time, so we'll finish with the Italians. They were there for a while, and their numbers started to grow. So the camp actually was built as 4 separate compounds. So the whole setup there was called Number 12 Cowra Prisoner of War and Internment Group, and it was built as if you can imagine, a large piece of pie with 4 slices. So there were 4 separate compounds there. And the Italians were there essentially permanently from 1941 through to the end of the war in 2 of those compounds, Compounds A and Compound C. When Japan they started to pick up some Japanese prisoners towards the end right at the end of 1942 and then early 43, and those numbers started to increase. They were never huge. In the end, we only probably picked up about 4,000 Japanese POW, and I think most of your listeners would understand that Japanese were told in those days to commit suicide to save the honour of themselves and their family and their emperor rather than being captured, certainly not to surrender. So in the end, we only took about 4,000. Only around about probably a bit over 1,100 to 1,200 end up coming here to Cowra. They started to arrive in early 1943.
Can you give us some sort of idea of the site at the height of the camp being populated by POWs? What sort of size and what sort of population are we talking about among all the POWs?
Each of those compounds held probably around about 1,000 each. It was a big place. So if you went up there on a normal sort of working day, there would have been a real buzz about the place because you had vehicles coming and going, you had people talking. If you had 4,000 people together talking, the Japanese were playing baseball, the Italians were singing, they were also out there sort of working in their gardens. So it would have been a very busy place with about 1,000 in each camp. The Japanese went into B compound, so it was A, B, C, and D around the circle. They spent most of their time in B compound. D compound was split up into 3 separate compounds: D1, D2, and D3, and that held Japanese officers. We were a signatory to the Geneva Convention. Japan was not, but so the Japanese officers were housed separately. They also had a separate section there for Italian fascists. Most of the Italians were fairly easygoing. They were allowed to go out and work details. They became pretty well trusted by the Australians, but there were some fascists there that were considered to be high security risks, so they were separately isolated. And there was another compound there for the Chinese and Koreans who were associated with the Japanese forces. They probably weren't military, they were probably cooks and labourers, but they separated them fairly early on because they found that the Japanese military were mistreating the Chinese and Koreans. They did not consider them to be equal, so they put them into a separate compound.
Now, with the focus on the breakout itself, which you're commemorating the 80th anniversary in August, what actually happened in the breakout?
The numbers started to grow in B compound, so we'll just talk about B compound. And there were concerns. I mean, if you start to overcrowd any particular space with people, tensions rise, shoulder to shoulder, and there was some concerns there. There were some rumours that had been spread and had been picked up by some of the Italians that the Japanese were planning a breakout, some sort of uprising. The Australian authorities had previously experienced a single escape about 16 months beforehand. One particular officer, Lieutenant Masao Naka, had actually broken out over the wire, and he was actually got out for about 9 hours. That was back in April 1943. We're now in August 44. After that particular escape, the Australian authorities there, the camp commandant, Monty Brown, Lieutenant Colonel Monty Brown, made representations to Victoria Barracks in Sydney. We need the security arrangements here upgraded. They never were. They were not upgraded up to the time of the breakout. The fences that were actually around the whole POW camp were barely higher than 5 to 6 feet high. So not typically what you'd see in one of the the POW movies on TV or in the theatre. They were quite low. But anyway, what they did arrange was they did bring up 2 Vickers machine guns and put them outside B compound as a special security issue, and people were trained to use those and trained to go to those in an emergency. So we get to the 4th of August 1944. The overcrowding was becoming a problem, so the Australian authorities had made a decision to move 700 of the Japanese out of B compound to another camp at Hay out in Western New South Wales. And they brought in the Japanese leaders of B compound. There were 4 of them. They went in to see Major Ramsey, and Major Ramsey then informed these 4 men, 4 Japanese leaders, we're taking 700 of your prisoners, your fellow soldiers, all under the rank of Lance Corporal. So all the private soldiers were going to be taken away and housed down in Hay. Now the Japanese leaders objected to that, and they said, "Why can't we all go?" and I think they were basically shut down and said, that's the order, that's what's going to happen. There's no argument about it, no negotiation, that's what's going to happen. The story we got from survivors in years that followed was that the Japanese leaders went back to all their hut leaders. They had 25 huts there, and they brought those leaders in, told them what was going to happen, and the story was that they then agreed to riot and to break out. That would be an uprising. They were nurturing this issue of dishonour, having been prisoners, and they decided that this riot, this breakout, wasn't an attempt really to escape. It was an attempt to die in battle. So it was a suicide thing that they were wanting to do to regain their honour. The hut leaders then went back to their huts, and we were told they took a vote, and the vote was to agree to the breakout. That vote was then taken back to the main leader, Mr. Akira Kanazawa, who was a sergeant major. He then said, "Okay, we have the agreement of all the huts. I now order that the breakout occur," and that was planned. So they went back to their huts. They got together all the weapons they could: baseball bats, knives and forks. There was supposed to be an inventory of all metal knives and forks and any metal objects there, but that was never undertaken. So they had ample recourse to get basically kitchen knives, and they filed them down, they rubbed them down on stones and got them nice and sharp, got their baseball bats together, made other weapons, and they were getting ready to go. Private Rolls was the one guard in the middle of Broadway. Broadway was the big strip that went down the centre of the POW camp. He was on guard there, and that very early in the morning, about 1:30 in the morning, got a little bit later, getting towards 1:50, and the Japanese ran from the huts over to him and started yelling out. Private Rolls could not understand him at all, but he knew something was happening, so he fired 2 warning shots. Then he ran for his life just as the whole thing erupted. The huts were set on fire. 18 of those huts were burnt to the ground, set on fire. The Japanese then raced out to all the perimeters of the camp, essentially racing into the machine gun fire. When that whole eruption, I suppose, started, all the soldiers, the Australian soldiers, were called out on call, and they went to the fences and started firing and shooting at the Japanese. And it was a fairly horrific, probably 20 minutes to 25 minutes. That's about as long as it went for. But within that time, there were probably about 180 Japanese were dead inside the camp, and about 300 had actually broken through the wire and escaped into the countryside.
If people were to visit the campsite at Cowra today, what's visible? What's left of the camp, if anything?
There's very solid interpretation up there with signage and information for people to understand. Some very good photographs, which will show you the layout of the camp. There's a viewing platform. You can walk around the camp. The camp actually operated up until March 1947. So the war finished in 1945, but they could not get all the prisoners back home. There was a requirement, an obligation by Australia to get POWs back to their home countries. The Japanese were the first out. They wanted to get them home as quickly as possible. Of course, the Americans had developed a huge, I suppose, program to get around 6 million Japanese back to their homeland. They were scattered all over the place in China, in the Philippines, all around Southeast Asia, in Australia. So they'd organised that very quickly, which was amazing, and they got those Japanese out either the end of 1945 or early 1946. The Italians, it was a different story. There was a worldwide lack of shipping around the place, so a lot of the Italians stayed right till the end of 46 and maybe early 47. In March 1947, they basically had an auction over 3 days, and they sold off pretty well everything that was at the camp, including buildings, barbed wire, window frames, anything that could be sold was sold. So what you see now, it's a historic site, a heritage site. You can see the remains of foundations there. There's only one building remaining there, which was an electrical switch hut in the garrison area, which was made of stone, made by the Italians. So that was the only one that they couldn't sell. Basically, you've got a large area that you can walk around, read the signs, and have a bit of an understanding how big the site was. Yeah, it's a very interesting place. I go up there fairly regularly. I'm quite interested up there. There's hardly a daytime hour that you go there that there's not somebody there.
Mm. If we turn to the 80th anniversary of the Breakout, can you take us through what you're actually doing for the anniversary?
Sure. So there's a program of events that's on the council website, which is council@cowra.nsw.gov.au, and that will tell you what's going on. So there are some lead-up events. So the main events occur on the 4th and the 5th of August. There are some lead-up events. So there is a play that's actually been put on by a local person, Lucy Austin, and it's the world premiere production of a new musical and play written by Cowra composer Lucy Austin, and it's based on the events surrounding the Cowra Breakout and subsequent reconciliation. And that's actually on the 26th, 27th and 28th of July. There's also a historical display at the Cowra Visitor Centre, goes from the 29th of July to the 10th of August, and that'll be featuring images and artefacts from the POW camp and of Cowra during that 1940s era. Also interesting, David, to understand that Cowra was a really big military town. It wasn't just the POW camp. I mentioned the Cowra military training camp, which was on the other side, completely separate establishment. It trained around about 80,000 troops during World War II. That's a huge number. And Cowra was a bit of a boom time for the town at that stage. Imagine 80,000 troops had to be fed, and bread baked and meat supplied and entertainment. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. We had a power alcohol factory here that was run by Colonial Sugar Refineries, where they manufactured synthetic fuels. There was the Edgels factory that had been built here, and its prime purpose was to manufacture food for American troops, mostly canned food and dehydrated food for the American troops. And we also had an annex here in our showground pavilion of the Lithgow Small Arms factory. We were making machine gun parts here. There was a lot going on here, huge amount going on. So getting back to what's happening too, at our regional art gallery here in Cowra, there's a touring exhibition from the Australian National Maritime Museum. It's featuring American and Australian photographers and a photographic exhibition of what was happening in Australia during wartime, during World War II. Then we get into, on Sunday the 4th of August, we have a Peace Bell ceremony and a torch run, which will start 3:30 in the afternoon at the Peace Bell. A lot of people may not know that the World Peace Bell Association awarded the Peace Bell to Cowra. That would normally go to a nation's capital, so it was actually awarded to Cowra because of its work with reconciliation. So there'll be a runner that will go up, and then there's going to be a lantern parade where several hundred of these lit lanterns will be taken up from the Japanese Gardens and Cultural Centre all the way up to the POW camp, and they'll be laid around a monument there. And there's going to be a community event up there with some poetry, and a Japanese soprano singer will be singing there. After that, we have a mayoral dinner, which is quite a big event. We had one of those for the 75th anniversary, and we have a significant number of groups coming out from Japan. Our keynote speaker and our guest will be Her Excellency Margaret Beazley, the Governor of New South Wales. She's coming. She'll be a keynote speaker along with the Japanese ambassador, Ambassador Suzuki. So it's going to be that's going to be a fairly big affair. And then after that, we go up to the POW camp at 1:30 a.m. and we have a commemorative event up there, which will be significant. And the narrator for that particular event will be Greg Granger, who has his travel show on commercial TV, and we'll have an event up there, and we'll talk about what happened in I suppose, an educational and an informative way. There'll be some special things happening up there to get that message across. There's a media breakfast at 7 a.m. A few hours after that. And then we go to the major wreath layings out at the Australian War Cemetery and the Japanese War Cemetery. We have the Australia's Federation Guard coming up here. They will be marching on there and undertaking a catafalque party and catafalque duties there. We have the Royal Military College Band coming up, a quintet will be coming up, and we also have a flyover of RAAF F-35A fighter plane, which will be coming over as a salute. And that's at the end of that, we move from the Australian War Cemetery to the Japanese War Cemetery. There are lots of wreaths that were laid, and there'll also be a Shinto and a Buddhist ceremony within the Japanese War Cemetery.
So you have some very significant events and people and events happening. Now, you also mentioned before that people, if they want to find out more, can go to the council website, and we'll make sure we post that as well for this podcast.
Sure. And specifically, if they would like to attend the mayoral dinner, that's on the council website, and you can buy those tickets online, and that's going to be a good event. One of the other things I want to mention too, we have 11 youth ambassadors, so we involve youth ambassadors, and they will play a very special part in looking after some of our VIPs. And they'll be present at all those particular events I was speaking about. We're very pleased to have those young people. I was happy enough to give them a bit of a talk yesterday about what their involvement will be, and they're very excited.
It's great, Graham. We obviously wish you the best of luck for the happenings in late July and in August for the 80th anniversary of the Cowra Breakout. And many thanks for joining us again and for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, David. And look, if anybody has any questions, they can email me. That address is anniversary@cowrabreakout.au. Anniversary@cowrabreakout.au.
Good on you. Thanks again. You can find out more information on the anniversary at the Cowra Council website at www.cowracouncil.com.au. That's the podcast for today. We're keen to hear your feedback by leaving a review on your podcast app, and your reviews helps new listeners find our podcast. You can help support this podcast via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on our website and Facebook page, and your support helps us with the production of this podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.